Most people believe that if you have paid off your home, you are safe. You worked 40 years, you saved, you sacrificed, and now you own your home outright. You look at your deed and you think, I am secure. Nobody can take this from me. But I want to show you how the economic machine actually works. What I'm seeing right now, and I have been studying these patterns for 50 years, is a confluence of forces that will force millions of American seniors out of their homes over the next 12 to 18 months. I'm not talking about a crash like 2008. That was a credit event. This is different. This is what I call a cost shock. It is a mechanical grinding of three forces that, when they converge, create a pressure that the average retiree on a fixed income simply cannot survive. Let me be specific about what is happening right now in this country. Homeowners' insurance premiums are projected to rise another 8% in 2026 and another 8% in 2027. That is a 16% increase over 2 years, according to real estate analytics firm Cotality. But that is just the national average. In states like Nebraska, Louisiana, Florida, and Oklahoma, seniors are already paying over $5,000 per year in insurance alone. Some states have seen premiums jump 40 to 70% in just the last few years. Arizona, Michigan, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Washington, Wyoming, all of them have experienced increases that would have seemed unthinkable a decade ago. Home insurance has increased by an average of 21% across the entire United States in just the last couple of years. The average premium nationally is now about $2,424 per year, but that average conceals enormous regional variation, crushing people in high-risk areas. Property taxes continue to climb because local governments are broke and getting more desperate by the month. Yes, there is a new $6,000 federal senior deduction that provides some relief, but it does not stop the mechanical reality. Your tax bill is tied to your home assessed value, and those values have been inflated by a decade of cheap money. Local governments see that inflated value and they tax it. They have no choice. They have pension obligations coming due. They have infrastructure costs deferred for decades. They have payrolls to meet. And your property is their easiest target because, unlike stocks or bonds, your house cannot move. It is nailed to the ground in a specific location under a specific jurisdiction that has taxing authority over you. And here's the trigger almost nobody is discussing. The trigger that I believe will set this entire cascade in motion. I call it the HELOC reset wave. Millions of seniors took out home equity lines of credit 10 years ago during the low-rate years when borrowing against your home seemed like free money. The rates were 2 or 3%, the payments were tiny, it seemed like the smart thing to do. Those loans are hitting the end of their draw period right now in 2025 and 2026. That means borrowers are going from interest-only payments to full principal plus interest payments at rates of 7 to 8% or higher. The payment shock is going to be devastating. When you add these three forces together, insurance plus taxes plus debt resets, you get a monthly cost shock that will double or triple the holding cost of a supposedly paid-off home for millions of Americans who thought they were secure. Here is the mechanical certainty I want you to understand, because this is how the economic machine actually works. When holding costs exceed income, liquidation becomes inevitable. Not because people want to sell, not because they made bad decisions, not because they were irresponsible, because the machine forces them to. The economic machine does not care about your memories in that house. It does not care that you raised your children there. It does not care that your grandchildren visit on holidays. It does not care that you plan to die in that home surrounded by everything you love. The machine only cares about cash flow. And when cash flow goes negative, the machine grinds you out with absolute mechanical certainty. By the end of this talk, I will show you exactly how this works, why it has happened before throughout history, and what you can do right now to position yourself on the right side of this wealth transfer. Because make no mistake, wealth does not disappear in these events. It never disappears. It changes hands. The only question is whether you will be among those handing it over or among those receiving it. But first, let me tell you a story about a mistake I made. A mistake that taught me everything I know about how these cycles work and why they are so predictable once you understand the mechanics. In 1982, I made the biggest mistake of my career. I was convinced the economy was going to collapse. I had studied the data obsessively. I had run the models hundreds of times. I was so certain that I went on television and told everyone we were headed for a depression. I testified before Congress. I told anyone who would listen. I was absolutely supremely confident in my analysis, and I was dead wrong. The market rallied spectacularly. My predictions fell apart completely. I lost everything. I had to let go of my entire staff one by one. I was so broke I had to borrow $4,000 from my father just to pay my family bills. I went from being a successful hedge fund manager to being humiliated publicly and nearly bankrupt privately. It was the lowest point of my entire life. But that failure was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean that with complete sincerity, because it taught me that no matter how confident I was, I could be wrong. It taught me humility in a way nothing else could have. And more importantly, it forced me to study history in a completely different way. Not the headlines that everyone reads, not the commentary that pundits provide, the actual mechanics, the patterns that repeat over and over and over again, because human nature does not change no matter how much technology advances or how sophisticated we think we have become. What I discovered is that economies move in cycles. Predictable mechanical cycles driven by credit and debt and the psychology of the people participating in them. Let me explain how this machine works, because once you understand it, you will see exactly what is happening right now with perfect clarity, and you will never look at the economy the same way again. There are three big forces that drive economic activity, and everything else is noise. First, there is productivity growth. That is the slow, steady increase in how much we produce over time. It moves gradually like a gentle upward slope. Technology improves incrementally. Workers get more skilled through experience and education. Processes become more efficient through innovation and competition. This productivity growth is the foundation of real wealth creation, and it moves at maybe 2% per year over the long term, regardless of what is happening in financial markets. Second, there is the short-term debt cycle. This one lasts about 5 to 10 years, and it is what most economists focus on because it is visible within a career. Credit expands, banks lend freely, people spend more than they earn because they can borrow the difference. Asset prices rise, everyone feels wealthy and optimistic. The economy booms and everyone congratulates themselves. Then credit contracts, lending tightens, spending falls because people have to pay back what they borrowed. Asset prices decline, we have a recession, and everyone panics. The Federal Reserve manages this cycle by raising and lowering interest rates. When the economy overheats, they raise rates to cool it down. When the economy weakens, they lower rates to stimulate borrowing and spending. But here is what most people miss, because they are not looking at a long enough time horizon. There is a third force that operates beneath everything else. The long-term debt cycle. This one lasts 50 to 75 years, which is longer than most careers and longer than most memories. It is the slow accumulation of debt over multiple generations. Each short-term cycle adds a little more debt to the system than gets paid off. The good times feel so good that people borrow a little more each time. Over decades, the total debt burden grows and grows and grows relative to income. And when it peaks, when the debt burden becomes so large it cannot be serviced even at very low interest rates, you get something much worse than an ordinary recession. You get what I call a deleveraging. A deleveraging is when the debt burden must be reduced not through growth and not through mild inflation, but through actual painful reduction. Defaults cascade through the system. Debts get restructured at losses to creditors. Assets get liquidated at distressed prices. Forced sales overwhelm the market. It is painful, it is disruptive, it destroys people's lives, and it is inevitable when debts grow faster than the income available to service them. This is not pessimism, this is arithmetic. Now let me connect this to seniors and housing, because this is where history becomes your teacher and where the patterns become undeniable. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, we saw the same pattern playing out with devastating consequences. Seniors who owned their farms outright lost them, not because of bad mortgages. They had no mortgages. They owned their land free and clear, just like many of you own your homes today. They lost their farms because they could not pay their property taxes when deflation crushed their incomes and destroyed the prices for everything they produced. Banks and governments foreclosed on paid-off properties for unpaid taxes. Families that had worked the same land for 3 generations lost everything because the machine ground them out without mercy. In the 1970s and early 1980s, we saw inflation destroy the purchasing power of fixed incomes in a different but equally devastating way. Seniors on pensions watched their real wealth evaporate year after year, even though the dollar amount stayed the same. A retiree in 1973 who had $50,000 in savings and thought they were comfortable had the equivalent of maybe $25,000 by 1982. Half their wealth gone not through bad investments but through the silent tax of inflation that governments use deliberately to reduce their own debt burdens at the expense of savers and people on fixed incomes. In 2008, we saw the housing bubble burst and the financial system nearly collapse. But here is what most people forget or never understood in the first place. The seniors who lost their homes in 2008 were not speculators flipping condos in Miami. Many were responsible people who had taken out home equity loans to cover medical bills that insurance did not pay, to help their adult children with down payments, to survive on fixed incomes that were not keeping pace with rising costs. They had been responsible their whole lives. They had equity in their homes, and they used that equity because they needed cash flow. When home values fell 30% or more, they were suddenly underwater on debt. They had accumulated over decades of small decisions that each seemed reasonable at the time. And now, in 2025, we are seeing all 3 historical patterns converge simultaneously in a way I have never witnessed before. We have property tax pressure like the 1930s, with local governments desperate for revenue. Municipal budgets are strained to breaking. Pension obligations are coming due. Infrastructure is crumbling. We have cost of living inflation like the 1970s crushing purchasing power. Insurance premiums are exploding far faster than wages or Social Security adjustments. Healthcare costs are rising relentlessly. Food prices are up 20 or 30% from just a few years ago. Everything seniors need to survive is becoming dramatically more expensive while their income stays essentially flat. We have equity extraction like 2008, with HELOC balances climbing to $411 billion and serious delinquencies rising quarter over quarter. Seniors have been borrowing against their homes to survive just like before, and those loans are coming due at much higher interest rates. But there is one critical difference this time that changes everything about how this will unfold. In 2008, the problem started with young families who could not afford their mortgages. This time, the trigger will be seniors who cannot afford to stay in homes they already own. The crisis will begin at the exit point of the housing market, and that changes everything. One person's spending is another person's income. That is the fundamental equation that drives all of economics. When seniors are forced to cut spending dramatically to pay holding costs, that money disappears from the economy. Local restaurants lose customers, retail stores lose sales, service providers lose clients. The ripple effects spread through entire communities. When seniors are forced to sell their homes in large numbers, it adds supply to a market where young buyers already cannot afford to purchase. More supply with static or declining demand means only one thing: falling prices, and falling prices mean equity evaporates, not just for the sellers, but for everyone else who owns property in those areas. The cycle accelerates. The pattern is always the same throughout history. The only question is which side of the wealth transfer will you be on when the music stops? Let me now talk about the illusion of wealth, because this is where most seniors are making a critical mistake right now that could cost them everything. You look at Zillow or Redfin. You see that your home is worth $500,000, maybe $600,000. You feel rich. You feel secure. You think you have options because you have all this equity. But let me ask you a fundamental question. Can you eat your home value? Can you pay your insurance premium with your home value? Can you buy groceries with your home value? Can you fill your prescriptions with your home value? No, you absolutely cannot. Because that number on Zillow is what I call notional wealth. It only becomes real wealth that you can actually use when you convert it to cash. And right now, for millions of seniors, the cost of holding that asset is consuming more cash than they have coming in. They are bleeding out slowly, month by month, and many do not even realize it is happening. Let me show you the mechanics of this squeeze with a concrete example that illustrates exactly what I'm talking about. Take a hypothetical couple. Let us call them Frank and Mary. They are 72 years old. They live in Tampa, Florida, in a home they bought 30 years ago. They paid off their mortgage completely in 2015. They did everything right according to conventional wisdom. Here is their actual situation today. Their home is worth $425,000 on paper, according to Zillow, a nice number that makes them feel wealthy. Their combined Social Security income is $3,800 per month, about $45,600 per year. Their property taxes have increased 35% over the past 5 years as home values soared in Florida. They are now paying $6,200 per year in property taxes alone for a home they supposedly own free and clear. Their homeowner's insurance has jumped from $2,400 per year in 2020 to $5,800 per year in 2025. That is a 142% increase in 5 years. Florida has been hit hard by hurricanes. Major insurers have pulled out of the market entirely. The remaining carriers have raised rates dramatically. Their home maintenance costs for roof repairs, HVAC service, plumbing issues average about $4,000 per year for a home built in 1998. Added up carefully, $6,200 in taxes plus $5,800 in insurance plus $4,000 in maintenance equals $16,000 per year just to hold the home. That is 35% of their entire gross income going to holding costs alone. Before food, before healthcare, before utilities, before transportation, before medications. And here is the kicker that makes this situation catastrophic. Frank took out a HELOC in 2015 for $60,000 when rates were near historic lows. He used it to help their daughter with a down payment on her first home. He was being a good father. He had the equity. The rates were only 3%. The interest-only payment was tiny. For 10 years, he has been paying $375 per month in interest-only payments. Manageable, comfortable, but in 2026, that loan resets. The draw period ends. His payment jumps to $890 per month to cover both principal and interest at today's elevated rates. That's an additional $6,180 per year in cash outflow that has to come from somewhere. Do the math with me. Frank and Mary's holding costs plus debt service now consume $22,180 per year. That is 49% of their gross income. Nearly half of everything they receive from Social Security goes to holding a home they supposedly own free and clear. They are mechanically insolvent, not because they are irresponsible, because the machine has turned against them. The rules changed while they were playing the game and nobody warned them. And Frank and Mary are not alone. There are millions of people in exactly this situation right now. More than 54% of homes in America are now owned by seniors. That number has increased from 44% in 2008. 79% of seniors own their homes. 3/4 of them have no mortgage and think they are secure. And seniors account for 41% of all revolving home equity credit outstanding. This is the asset-rich, cash-poor trap. It is a mechanical consequence of the long-term debt cycle reaching its peak while fixed costs explode and fixed incomes stagnate. Now, I need to explain the central bank dilemma, because this is why no government rescue is coming to save you no matter who is in the White House. The Federal Reserve has two main tools. It can raise interest rates to fight inflation, or it can lower interest rates to stimulate borrowing and spending. If the Fed lowers rates significantly, it would reduce HELOC payments for some borrowers. But lower rates also mean higher inflation because cheaper money means more money chasing the same goods. Prices rise, insurance costs rise, property taxes rise. The cost of everything seniors need goes up even faster. The Fed tried this approach in 2020 and 2021. They dropped rates to nearly zero. They pumped trillions into the economy. And it created the inflation surge that is now crushing everyone on fixed incomes. If the Fed keeps rates elevated, it keeps borrowing costs high. The HELOC reset wave hits harder, but it also keeps mortgage rates elevated for potential buyers. Young families cannot afford to purchase homes at 6 or 7% mortgage rates. Buyer demand weakens. And when seniors need to sell, there is nobody who can afford to buy them. This is what I call the impossible box. The Fed cannot solve this problem without creating a different problem. That is the nature of the late-stage debt cycle. As I said recently, if the United States does not cut the deficit to 3% of GDP soon, we risk facing an economic heart attack within the next few years. The mechanics are already in motion. And the first sector to feel that heart attack is not going to be Wall Street. It is going to be Main Street. It is going to be seniors in paid-off homes who are about to discover that their asset is actually a liability. Now let me show you the specific trigger, because every deleveraging has a moment when the slow squeeze becomes a sudden break. A home equity line of credit works in two distinct phases. During the first phase, called the draw period, you can borrow money as needed, and you typically only pay interest. This period usually lasts 10 years. The payments are low. The burden feels manageable. Then comes the second phase, the repayment period. The draw period ends, you can no longer borrow additional funds, and you must begin paying back the principal plus interest over the remaining term. Here's the mechanical reality. When a HELOC resets from interest only to full amortization, monthly payments can double or even triple overnight. Many seniors took out HELOCs during the low-rate years of 2012 to 2015 when rates were 3 or 4%. They have been paying interest only at those low rates for a decade. Now their loans are resetting at today's rates, which are 7 to 8% or higher, and simultaneously converting from interest only to principal plus interest. A senior who was paying $200 per month could see their payment jump to $600 or $700. That is a 200 to 300% increase in monthly cash outflow. The cohort of HELOCs originated in 2014 through 2016 is now entering the reset window. Millions of loans are converting, millions of payments are spiking, and millions of seniors are facing a cash flow crisis they did not see coming. When you combine this payment shock with the insurance squeeze and the property tax pressure, the math simply breaks for millions of American households. Cash flow goes deeply negative. Savings accounts deplete month after month. And then comes the forced sale. But here's the cruel irony. When seniors are forced to sell in large numbers, they are selling into a market where buyers cannot afford to buy. Mortgage rates remain above 6%. Young families are already stretched. The combination of high home prices plus high interest rates plus high insurance costs has made home ownership unaffordable for millions of potential first-time buyers. Supply increases as seniors liquidate. Demand remains weak. The only way to clear the market is for prices to fall. The senior who thought they had $500,000 in equity discovers they can only sell for $420,000 or $380,000. And if they have a HELOC balance plus back property taxes plus real estate commissions, they might walk away with far less than expected. This is the wealth transfer I have been warning about. Wealth does not disappear in a deleveraging, it changes hands. When distressed sellers are forced to liquidate, who buys? Institutional investors buy. Private equity firms buy. Hedge funds with cash reserves buy. Anyone with liquidity and patience buys at discounted prices. Fannie Mae projects that between 2026 and 2036, somewhere between 13 million and 14.6 million older homeowners will exit homeownership. That is an increase of at least 42% over the previous decade. That is not a prediction, that is demography. The only question is whether those exits happen on seniors' terms through planned downsizing at fair prices, or on the market's terms through forced liquidation at distressed prices. In every major deleveraging I have studied, people said the same things. They said the government will step in. They said the Federal Reserve will save us. They said this cannot happen here. But the mechanics always win. You cannot borrow your way out of a debt problem. You cannot print your way out of an inflation problem. I said recently, and I will repeat it now. Real estate is not a good investment in the current environment. First, it is interest rate sensitive, more sensitive to interest rates than to inflation. Second, it is the easiest asset to tax. Governments know where your property is. They can always get their money. Third, it is illiquid. You cannot sell a house in an afternoon. Those are not political opinions. Those are mechanical facts. So what do? First, understand this. I am not telling you to panic. Panic is the worst response. The people who panicked in 2008 sold at the absolute bottom. I am telling you to prepare. Here are the principles I would apply. Audit your holding costs immediately. Add up your property taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, and any debt service. Divide that by your gross income. If the answer is more than 30%, you're in the danger zone. Treat your home as a financial instrument, not a sentimental trophy. Your home does not love you back. It is an asset on your balance sheet. If you're going to sell, sell while you have control of the timing. Get liquid. For people in your situation, cash is not trash. Cash is optionality. Cash is survival. If you cannot cover 12 months of expenses without selling assets, you are dangerously overexposed. I have said many times that people do not have an adequate amount of gold in their portfolio. When bad times come, gold is a very effective diversifier. I believe a prudent allocation is 10 to 15% in gold. Diversify your risks. Avoid concentration. Having all your wealth in one asset class is dangerous. For many seniors, that basket is their home. That creates enormous vulnerability. Act before the crowd. Right now, 61% of baby boomers say they never plan to sell their homes. But when the cost shock hits, the crowd will move all at once. If you wait until everyone else is selling, you are selling at the bottom. Pain plus reflection equals progress. The pain is coming. It is mechanical. It is inevitable. But if you use this moment to reflect and understand how the economic machine works, you can position yourself to survive and even benefit. The people who emerge from this deleveraging stronger will not be the ones with the biggest houses. They will be the ones with the clearest understanding of how the machine works. Understand the machine, respect the cycles, prepare before the crowd. I want to leave you with one final thought that I believe captures everything I have been trying to share with you today. Throughout my career, I have watched smart people lose everything because they confused feeling safe with being safe. They owned beautiful homes in nice neighborhoods. They had paid off their mortgages. They had done what they were supposed to do. And they believed with complete conviction that they were protected. But safety is not a feeling. Safety is a mathematical relationship between your income and your expenses, between your assets and your liabilities, between your liquidity and your obligations. When that relationship goes wrong, no amount of feeling safe will protect you from the mechanical consequences that follow. The seniors who will thrive through what is coming are not the ones who bury their heads in the sand and hope for the best. They are not the ones who trust that someone will rescue them. They are not the ones who believe this time will somehow be different from every other time in history. The seniors who will thrive are the ones who face reality as it is, not as they wish it were. They are the ones who understand that the economic machine is not cruel or kind. It is simply mechanical. It operates according to rules that do not care about fairness or justice or what people deserve. It simply responds to the forces of credit and debt and cash flow and human psychology in ways that have remained remarkably consistent across centuries and civilizations. When you truly understand how the machine works, you stop being its victim and you start being able to navigate it. You stop reacting emotionally to every headline and every market movement. You start seeing the patterns that others miss because they are zoomed in too close or looking at too short a time horizon. And most importantly, you start making decisions based on mechanical reality rather than wishful thinking. That is the difference between preparation and hope. That is the difference between positioning and praying. That is the difference between those who survive and those who get swept away. The choice is still yours to make, but the window for making it wisely is closing with each and every passing month. Act now while you still have good options available to you. Do not wait for the crisis to force your hand on you. Do not become another sad statistic in the very long history of wealth transfers that have consistently favored the well-prepared over the merely hopeful and the truly knowledgeable over the naive and totally unprepared people out there. You now have the knowledge that so many others are completely missing today. What you do with it is entirely up to you. The machine will keep turning regardless of your choice. I hope that you choose wisely. Remember always that pain plus reflection equals progress. Thank you very much for listening to me.